This is Covering the Spread, part of the FanDuel Podcast Network.
Each of the past couple of years, we have had JJ Zachariason on Covering the Spread before the NFL season to talk about NFL season-long player props, and JJ's hit rate has been fantastic. So before the 2023 year gets underway, we got to have him back on once again. We're going to do that today. We're going to pick JJ's brain about building projections, the toughest teams to project this year, how to find upside, and his favorite player props that he likes for 2023 over at FanDuel Sportsbook. This is Covering the Spread right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network. My name is Jim Sonis. I am a digital media managing editor for FanDuel Research, joined here as mentioned by JJ Zachariason. Check him out on Twitter at LateRoundQB. Find his work at LateRound.com and the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast. JJ, it is a delight to have you back on the show for today. How you doing?
I'm good, man. I'm good. It's good to talk to you. I feel like we haven't done a show in a handful of months, so it's good to sit down and talk, maybe even longer. It's been a while.
Draft? Did we talk before the draft or no?
I don't know, but it would have been around that time. If not, it's at least then from last football season. I mean, it's been a while since we've been able to chop it up.
Right. It's weird. I don't think we've gone that long between shows for a very long time. So it's good to have you back on the show. You got, new shelves in your backdrop. I believe the sign is somewhat new. I'm not sure if you had that last year as well, but like a lot of changes. I like it.
Yeah. I mean, look, my daughter keeps buying me Funko Pops. I will put the Funko Pops behind me when she does.
Well, I've only got one, so if Avery gets bored of buying them for you, let me know. We got Bubba Wallace, wrong side. Bubba Wallace over here, and he's lonely. So if Avery gets bored and needs to buy more, let me know, and we can I can accommodate her.
There will be a lot of she only buys female Funko Pops. So I've gotten Elsa and Anna from Frozen, Angelica from Rugrats. She bought that one. Well, I say she bought. Obviously, she just turned 5, so she's not purchasing these things on Amazon. My wife is, but it's very endearing. She needs, and I agree with her. There needs to be more female representation on the back shelf there.
Absolutely. I have none. So we'll get Avery on the job to figure this out for me as well. We're going to pick JJ's brain on all things season-long props here in just 1 second. But first, a reminder to make sure you're subscribed to the Covering the Spread podcast feed wherever you get your podcasts. We had Austin Cass on yesterday to break down EPL Match Week number 3. I talked some NASCAR and Daytona as well. We also had Dr. Ed Feng on Wednesday to break down College Football Week 0. To get those shows, make sure you are subscribed to Covering the Spread wherever you get your podcasts, and check us out on the FanDuel YouTube page and on FanDuel TV Plus. Get ready for the NFL season with incredible offers from FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Plus, all customers who bet $5 will get $100 off NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Now is the best time to join FanDuel. The app is easy to use, and you can bet on everything from spreads to player props and more. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. Must be 21 plus and present in select states. FanDuel is offering online sports wagering in Kansas under an agreement with Kansas Star Casino LLC. First online real money wager only. $10 first deposit required. Bonus issued as non-withdrawable bonus bets that expire 7 days after receipt. Restrictions apply. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit FanDuel.com/RG in Colorado, Iowa, Michigan, New Jersey, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Illinois, Tennessee, and Virginia. Call 1-800-NEXT-STEP or text NEXT STEP to 53342 in Arizona, 1-888-789-7777, or visit ccpg.org/chat in Connecticut. 1-800-9-WITH-IT in Indiana, 1-800-522-4700. Visit ksgamblinghelp.com in Kansas, 1-877-770-STOP in Louisiana. Visit mdgamblinghelp.org in Maryland, 1-800-GAMBLER.net in West Virginia, or call 1-800-522-4700 in Wyoming. Hope is here. Visit gamblinghelplinema.org or call 800-327-5050 for 24/7 support in Massachusetts. Call 1-877-HOPE-AND-WIRE, text HOPE-AND-WIRE in New York. NFL Sunday Ticket offer ends 9/18/23. No refunds. Terms and embargoes apply. $100 off NFL Sunday Ticket, not YouTube TV. YouTube TV base plan required to watch YouTube TV. Redemption requires a Google account and current form of payment. Commercial use is excluded. Now, JJ, we've had you on the show, as mentioned, every year we've had Covering the Spread so far to talk season-long props, but probably have new listeners from that first show to now. So I want to go through your overall process for building out projections, which we can leverage to then bet player props. What does that process look like for you each year when you're building those projections?
Yeah, so there's a lot of regression analysis that goes on, but it starts at the team level where I'm projecting out, pass rates, and then that builds into plays run per game and number of pass attempts and rush attempts teams have. And so at a high level, I'm looking at things like coordinator data and previous season data, all that good stuff to sort of project what these pass rates are going to be per team. Looking at win totals is another thing because obviously game script can play a role in how pass heavy a team is or not. And then once you get the team level stuff, you can then go to I go to the quarterbacks and I look at go quarterback by quarterback and do some regression analysis with their yards per attempt numbers. And then you get a yardage total, and I have some yards to touchdown conversion stuff that I look at. And then obviously you can adjust that based on what we've seen and how they've performed like in the red zone and if they're going to be more pass heavy in the red zone. Some of it is subjective. I think that needs to be said. With this kind of stuff, that there is a lot of subjectivity involved. And then once the quarterback numbers are out there, then I can start to essentially divvy up those numbers in terms of passing and rushing, with running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends. So, a lot of people think just in terms of raw targets, whether it's sports betting, especially more casual fantasy football managers. But I look in target share and backfield share. And so what I mean by that is it's a percentage of the team targets as opposed to just raw targets. So that's stickier year over year. If a player had a 25% target share last season, and that equated to 150 targets, well, that offense might not be as pass heavy, or it might be, more pass heavy, what have you. And so if you just look at the target share, you're able to sort of look at these players within the context of their current projection, the team projection. And so I look at target share for wide receivers, backfield share, rush share for running backs. And then you sort of just project things out from there. I'm getting yardage, I'm looking at yards per target and stuff. And then I'm looking at things like average depth of target for these guys. But I think that the overall sort of look at this is that I'm starting at the team level and then I'm going to the individual level after getting those team level numbers.
And you mentioned that there's a lot of subjectivity involved. And I think there has to be, in a sense, with NFL stuff, because let's take the Baltimore Ravens as an example here. You can look at what Todd Monken did in Tampa Bay and try to, project that for Baltimore. But having Jameis Winston, Ryan Fitzpatrick is very different than Lamar Jackson. So right. I feel like that'd be the toughest part, is trying to figure out what to expect from new teams with new situations. So how much for you is looking at data for that versus putting your own, I don't know, I think that I feel like just having some level of personal input has to be involved with that process, right?
Yeah, it is. It 100% is. I mean, I start by looking at it all algorithmically, right? So I'm looking at it all from the standpoint of strictly numbers and what the regression analysis says. And then from there, I'm adjusting. So if we look at Baltimore, for instance, obviously, if you were to just say, oh, this is a Greg Roman offense once again,
right,
then those numbers are going to be really skewed towards the run than what it's probably going to look like. The nice part, too, is with coordinator data, you can look at what's happened in neutral game script situations with these guys to see what they're truly about as opposed to overall situations. So, neutral script pass rate is a lot more predictive year over year than overall pass rate. And the reason for that is because teams, when they're leading, they run the ball more. When they're trailing, they throw the ball more. And so when games are close, within 6 points, lots of ways to measure this, obviously. But when, it's within 6 points, that's basically the true colors, if you will, of how these teams operate. So, you can look at that with a Todd Monken and versus a Greg Roman and realize that, Greg Roman is more run heavy, a lot more run heavy, even versus a typical team, in those neutral script environments. Yeah, you gotta use personnel and just analyze personnel and subjectively say, okay, they have Lamar Jackson, so they're going to be more run heavy. But I think that the other point with all of this is that you don't need to be so precise when it comes to projections. To me, especially when you're betting these, to me, it's more about if there are any outliers that you're seeing, within these projections. If there's something glaring or something obvious out there that the market's saying that you're not seeing, or vice versa, then those are the guys that you can really bet on. And if you just have a relatively sound process with the team stuff and then the player stuff, you're gonna be able to find those instances.
Absolutely. Finding those outliers is always going to be important when it comes to this kind of stuff. Now, you built out your projections a long time ago for this year. You've had them ready for a bit. When you were going through that process, what were the toughest teams to project? Because you look about this from a betting perspective, having teams that are tough to project can be both good and bad. If it's bad, it means just don't bet them. Who cares? No bet is better than a bad bet. But it could also present opportunities if sportsbooks also have issues projecting those situations. So what teams to you were toughest to project for 2023?
Yeah, and look, sportsbooks will have a hard time projecting them too. I think, it's not like this is a lot of subjectivity, as we've been saying. So I think Baltimore is one team that you mentioned, with the coordinator change, they're going to be more pass heavy. Every move that they've made this offseason has hinted, towards them throwing the ball more. They get OBJ, Zay Flowers, Rashad Bateman back. They obviously have not just one good tight end, but, Isaiah Likely is not bad either. So I think that they're going to be a lot more pass heavy. So they're a little bit hard to project only because we've seen them run their offense a certain way over the last 4 years or so with Greg Urban or however long it's been. But two other teams that I think are even more difficult. One of them, Chicago. And I say Chicago because they had a historically low pass rate last year with Justin Fields and company, but they add DJ Moore to the mix. And what we've seen over the last, few seasons is when these teams add these top-notch wide receivers, we have seen a slight bump in the way that they operate their offense in terms of pass rate. So I think that we can expect that. The problem with them is more the projection on like an individual level, where I feel good about DJ Moore seeing a high target share. So DJ Moore, fine. He's not that hard to project, but what's Darnell Mooney's target share going to look like? What's Chase Claypool's target share going to look like? And then that backfield is a complete disaster with Khalil Herbert. They draft Roshan Johnson and then Deontay Foreman, who I think is sort of the RB3 on that team. How is that going to really unfold and look? And then of course they have Justin Fields, and how much is he going to run? What's this offense going to look like? Are they going to try to really get a true look at him as a passer in this sort of newer look offense? So I think Chicago's difficult, but I would argue the most difficult team to project this year offensively is Green Bay. I think that I can give you a general idea of target shares for their big three wide receivers. So that's good that they don't have that much depth there. So you can kind of have a decent idea as to what the target share is going to look like for Christian Watson versus Romeo Doubs versus Jaden Reed. But there's just a lot of question marks as to the talent on that team. Christian Watson showed up last year. He absolutely hits a lot of the marks that we should look for and what could be an elite wide receiver. But there's a lot of downside to his profile too, as a 4-year smaller school wide receiver. He didn't see that amazing of target share numbers across the entire season. So there are some, there is some volatility there. Romeo Doubs, was good as a rookie, all things considered, within the context, but it could just go in a lot of directions. I really like Jaden Reed as a player. I like Luke Musgrave as a player, but when you have rookies in starting roles right away, that just invites more volatility to your projection. And so, and then obviously the big wild card is Jordan Love good? We have no idea if he's good or not. So I just think because of those individual players from a talent perspective, I'd say that Chicago is more of a muddied situation outside of DJ Moore, but then Green Bay is more of a talent-driven one where it's just hard to know how good these players actually are.
And like the pass to run ratio is tough too, because, they were kind of run heavy more than you'd expect. And what do they do with that when their quarterback is not potentially, maybe is a future Hall of Famer? Right. It's a very different thing to go from Aaron Rodgers to Jordan Love. Like, do they become very run heavy in the situation? I don't know, which is why I'm glad I'm not doing it. You are, because that team would be a massive, massive headache for sure. Now, you've had success on this show in identifying upside markets, guys to lead the league in rushing yardage, stuff like that. And if a player is going to wind up doing that, they almost always have to beat their projections, unless there's like some crazy situation where guy is like already projected to be well above the pack. So in a way, you have to predict where your projections may be wrong, or predict where there is additional upside for players who could blow past their projections. So what do you look for when trying to identify players who have upside in those markets?
Yeah, I think that there's two sort of things that work in parallel here. One of them being competition on the team, right? So I always say that, targets are earned, for instance, at wide receiver, or rush attempts are earned, hypothetically. I mean, it's a little bit easier for a running back to just see rush attempts because a coach is just sitting there saying, hey, get on the field, we're going to give you the ball. But you have to be talented enough to rise on your depth chart and to be that guy who's going to see the ball in those situations. A wide receiver, you have to get open in order to see a target. You have to run the right route. You have to be on the same page as your quarterback. there's more talent involved in seeing volume at wide receiver than there is at running back. And so what I always say is that targets are earned, but in order to see a crazy ceiling in terms of target share or in terms of backfield share, if you are a good player and if you are going to earn those targets, if there's a lack of competition around you, that's when you can really hit that crazy ceiling. See that like Brandon Marshall back in Chicago days, like 40% target share or whatever it was. That's where that ceiling can really come into play. And so that's one piece is competition, but the other piece really is talent. The league leaders every year are very talented players.
Right.
Don't get cute and bet guys who don't have a backbone as a prospect, that don't have a backbone, even in terms of just showing us something. Obviously, you're not going to bet like a rookie to lead the league. I mean, maybe Bijan Robinson aside if you want to, but at least at wide receiver, you're not going to bet a rookie wide receiver to lead the league in basically any statistical category, because there's not that much of a backbone there. We don't know if they're good or not yet. But when it comes to wideouts, especially, you want those players to be uber talented in order to really, hit that upside. And then the last thing I'll say too, that's sort of popping to my head right now, but there are certain roles that these players play. And if you're looking at like a rushing prop and you're staring at a guy like Austin Eckler or something, understand that he's not playing a role on his team, even with the lack of competition on that team, where he's going to carry the ball 25 times a game like a Derrick Henry or a Nick Chubb. And so understanding the roles of these individual players also goes a long way. For sure.
So there are a lot of factors involved, and it's important to consider all of them before you wind up placing a bet. Oh, speaking of which, let's do so and take a look at these markets over at FanDuel Sportsbook. Let's begin with those leaders. It can be a rushing leader, passing leader, touchdown leaders, et cetera, et cetera. Got all those over at FanDuel Sportsbook. When you look at those markets, JJ, which bets stand out to you right now?
Yeah, I got a couple. I think that Trevor Lawrence right now at plus 1,800 to throw the most passing touchdowns is pretty intriguing. Those are the 8th highest odds, but I have him 5th in projected passing touchdowns this year. There's volatility to any touchdown statistic, but I think that the case for Lawrence is pretty obvious where the weapons are there. They have Christian Kirk, Evan Ingram, Zay Jones looked good last year. And now they add Calvin Ridley. So that's there at least. And then, Lawrence taking a step forward again. This is essentially his like year 2, I would say, not only in this system, but year 1 is just really hard with Urban Meyer to really take anything away from it. So I do think that he's a pretty interesting bet at plus 1,800. And then I'm looking at the wide receiver market and looking at the league leaders in receiving yards. One guy that first popped out to me a little bit, and this is sort of outside the box thinking. This isn't my main bet, but Jalen Waddle is kind of interesting at plus 2,500. And the main reason I say that is I think there's an outside chance that he's just good enough to like get close to being the league leader in receiving yards, because the way the target tree works in that offense is the two of those guys, Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, are going to see over 50% of the team's targets. And so obviously, Tyreek Hill should be the odds on favorite to outdo and outpace Jalen Waddle in receiving yards. But what I like about this number is the fact that if Tyreek Hill misses 4 games, then Waddle all of a sudden would probably have closer to like plus 1,200 or so odds to be that league leader. So I think Waddle's interesting, but I think the better bet is Amon-Ra St. Brown at plus 3,000.
Wow.
One of the things that I feel like is kind of going overlooked with him is the fact, they add Jahmyr Gibbs, they add Sam Laporta. Both of those guys are more than likely lower average depth of target players, and they're guys who are going to see, catches closer to the line of scrimmage. Some could see that as a bad thing for Amon-Ra St. Brown, but I also see it as we know, or we at least believe, that St. Brown is a really good wide receiver. And over his first 2 years in the league, he's seen very, very low average depth of targets because he's played this slot role where he's the one who's sort of hovering closer to the line of scrimmage. Jameson Williams out for the first 6 weeks. Who knows if he's even good or not? Very bad vibes around. I keep saying that on podcasts. Just very bad vibes surrounding Jameson Williams. So what if Amon-Ra St. Brown maybe plays the perimeter a little bit more? Maybe sees more down the field targets. Then all of a sudden his yards per target rate can really increase. And we know that volume is going to associate and correlate to high receiving totals. And we know that this Lions offense is likely to be one that throws the ball a decent bit. So I think Amon-Ra St. Brown at plus 3,000, especially when you look at some of the guys going around him and the odds around him, I think that he's the obvious, like, just sticking out to me as the best bet there.
Well, he gets the best quarterback in football, Jared Goff. He gets to play nine home games because the NFC has the set week 17 or week 18 this year. They have 9 home games plus 1 road game in a dome in Minneapolis. So that's all beneficial as well. And those first 6 weeks with no Jameson Williams, their number 2 receiver is going to be either Khalif Raymond or Marvin Jones in 2023, which is wild. And like Khalif Raymond's probably the best field stretcher of that group. So yeah, if you add on a couple of downfield targets for Amon-Ra St. Brown, I think that really is, you were talking about building blocks for upside. That I feel like that's exactly what you're looking for.
Yep. 100%.
All right. So Amon-Ra St. Brown, 30-1 to lead in receiving. Trevor Lawrence at 18-1 to lead in passing touchdowns. Couple of spots JJ is looking at there. We also do have individual over-unders posted for, it feels like, every person. So JJ, looking at those, any of those stand out to you at FanDuel?
Yeah, so I have a few of these. Ramondre Stevenson right now, his over-under rushing yards is 875.5. I'm taking the under there. I'm a little bit afraid of him hitting that number. In games without Damian Harris last year, and I'm not counting the game where Stevenson got hurt early against Arizona when everyone thought he was just going to dominate, and then he gets hurt as a primetime game. We see some Kevin Harris and Pierre Strong, and Ramondre Stevenson didn't do anything. But in games without Damian Harris, he averages 79% running back rush share per game. With Damian Harris last year, that dropped from 79% to 55%. His yards per game on the ground was 78 versus 58 with and without Damian Harris. And that's skewed that 58 number with Damian Harris is skewed very, very heavily by a 161 yard performance against the Lions, where Damian Harris got hurt in the first quarter. So technically that 58 number is kind of closer to like 48 if you take that game away. Right. And I'm only running through that just to show you that when he's had more competition in that backfield, they didn't split up the receiving work. He was still seeing a crazy, crazy target share in that offense because they were using him as their primary pass catching back and their third down back. But without Damian Harris in the lineup, he definitely saw a huge uptick in running back and in rushing numbers. And so I don't know if Zeke is just going to play a 1-to-1 role like Damian Harris played, but I do think that Zeke is going to hurt Ramondre Stevenson a lot more on the ground than through the air. And I'm not sure New England's going to be a good team this year. And if they see negative game scripts, that's great for Ramondre Stevenson from a pass catching standpoint, even a fantasy standpoint, because he's going to get a lot of dump offs. He's going to be fine as a receiver. But I do have, some hesitation with him on the ground, because if you were to take that number that I was talking about earlier without Damian Harris and prorate that, even across 17 games, he's hitting 850 yards. That's still under. That's without a potential injury happening. So I think Stevenson under that mark makes a lot of sense. That's the first one. Darren Waller is another one. Right now, his line is set at 640 receiving yards, and I'm going over. There's obvious injury risk with Waller, but I have him projected for over 200 more yards than that. And so I think that that's baked in well enough, given the injury risk, to go with the over there. There's not much competition in that offense. He should have an easy time hitting a 20% target share. And then sticking with the tight end position, George Kittle right now, his over-under is 675.5. I'm taking the under for his total receiving yards. When their big four were healthy last year, so that's CMC, Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, and George Kittle. George Kittle averaged under a 14% target share in that offense. It was not good. I think a lot of people think that Brock Purdy was this great thing for Kittle, but it was really just from a touchdown standpoint. Down the stretch last year, Purdy in the regular season when he was starting, George Kittle saw 54% of San Francisco's receiving touchdowns, but his yardage totals, they were fine. I mean, he had big plays and such, but this is a tight end that historically has had a lot of peaks and valleys, week in and week out. There's just not that much consistency with him. And with all of these other weapons in the offense, it's pretty easy to see that he could be the odd man out, especially if they're leading in games, they have positive game scripts. They use him frequently as a blocker because he can do that so well. So I'm going to take the under with George Kittle. I honestly think that the over-under lines for Waller versus Kittle should be flipped.
Yeah, and I think it'd be fun to have a head-to-head marker between those two guys, because one is, I know that the Giants were somewhat run-heavy last year, but they were more pass-heavy than you'd think with Daniel Jones back there. So that was intriguing. And also with San Francisco, like, they're going to be run-heavy. They're always slow from a pace perspective, too. And like you said, we've seen spots where Kittle, when guys are healthy, just not getting any big target share. It was super annoying last year when he had that like crazy run of efficiency, because I never used him in DFS and it was very annoying. But it's hard to keep that up. And there was a reason I was not using him in the situations. I did want to go back to New England for a second here, because when they signed Zeke, I thought the money they gave him stood out. It's $3 million is like I think his cap hits like just south of that, just south of $3 million. That's a lot of money for a guy being brought in at this point in the year. So it's not as if they were signing, I mean, Latavius Murray should be a factor for Buffalo, but like if they had brought in Latavius Murray at this point in the year and paid him, close to the vet minimum, that would have been a lot less of a red flag for me than bringing in Zeke for how much they paid him.
Yeah, 100%. Totally agree. I just think that, in the fantasy world, a lot of people sort of brushed off the Zeke signing as it wasn't that big of a deal for Ramondre. I don't know if it's like a massive deal, but it's definitely something, especially from a rushing perspective. And a lot of Ramondre's work as a receiver last year was very dump off heavy, was very, I mean, it's like cheap receiving yards. It wasn't like they were lining him up in the slot and stuff. And so I do think there's some concern about Ramondre's role this year.
Yeah, he's still the best pass catcher on the team, probably, which is an indictment of that offense. But from a rushing perspective, there are serious downside cases there. Any final futures you want to lock in before the season kicks off, JJ?
Yeah, I got one. I like Drake London at plus 140 to score 6 or more touchdowns this year. Last season, in one of the most run-heavy offenses basically since the 1960s in Atlanta, he actually had an expected touchdown number of 7.8 according to Pro Football Focus's formula. And so he only scored 4 of those 7.8. He didn't get to 7.8. But if you look at his numbers, he was 14th in the league in red zone targets. He was top 20 in end zone targets, which is the same as AJ Brown. That's in a run heavy offense. The Falcons should see natural regression favorably in terms of them being a little bit more pass heavy this year. And again, I mean, he's someone who there's not that much outside of him in that offense to really steal some of those looks. So he was a big underachiever in the touchdown column last year. That's why I think his line is the way that it is right now. But I would be smashing the over the six touchdowns for Drake London. He realistically could get there in 10 or so games.
Yeah. If you don't want as big of a payout, you can also take London over 4.5. That's minus 116 right now. And I think that you could justify that one too. But if you want a bit more fun, I think that market JJ was talking about makes a lot of sense as well. That is JJ Zachariason. As mentioned, you can find him on Twitter at Late Round QB. Find his work over at lateround.com. Check out the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast. And JJ, you got your draft kit available as well over at lateround.com. Where can people find that if they're looking to get some insights in their season-long leagues?
Yeah, lateround.com. Just click guides at the top, and it's the draft guide. You can get a lot of strategy related information, players to target, players to avoid, my rankings and tiers, and it's updated weekly. So check it out, lateround.com.
And we'll have you back here on the show every Friday talking player props once again. I am psyched for that. So JJ, have fun for the rest of the summer, and we'll talk to you again on Friday, week 1.
Sounds good, man. Appreciate it.
All right. That is all that we have here for today. If you got any questions for me, I am on Twitter at Jim Sannes, JIMSANNES. You can also follow FanDuel Research at FanDuel Research. Have a fantastic weekend, everybody. We'll talk to you once again next week. This has been Covering the Spread right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network.